What if the activities you think are causing you pain aren't actually causing you pain at all? I know it sounds impossible. After all, you sit down and your back hurts. You bend over and the pain shoots through your spine. You walk too long and everything aches. The connection between the pain and where you're getting the pain seems so obvious, so logical. And this is the case for so many of my clients, whether that's the back, whether that's hands, whether that's neck, shoulders. Um, so I know it sounds impossible, but what if your brain has simply learned to associate certain activities with pain, even when those activities are perfectly safe? So think about this. Have you ever noticed that your pain isn't always following the same rules? So maybe some days you can sit for an hour with minimal discomfort, but other days, even 5 minutes is unbearable. Maybe you can walk pain-free when you're excited, you know, about where you're going or what you're going to be doing, but struggle with pain where you're dreading the event, the destination, whatever the situation is. So these inconsistencies are clues that something else is happening beyond the simple physical cause and effect. So our brain is incredibly good at making predictions to keep us safe. If you ate something and you got sick afterwards, our brain would create an association that food means danger. Even if the food was perfectly fine and you got sick from, something else entirely, your brain wouldn't take any chances. And the same thing happens with activities and pain. So maybe the first time your back flared, you happen to be sitting at your desk and your brain trying to protect you create an association between sitting and meaning that that sitting means danger. And from that point onward, every time you sit, your brain sends the danger signal, not because sitting is actually harmful, but because it believes it's putting you at risk, that that's sitting putting you at risk. So I never forget when I first started questioning my own pain patterns. I had been convinced that sitting was dangerous for my back. Even 10 minutes at my desk would leave me in agony, in so much pain. I had rearranged my whole entire life around that fact. But when I started paying closer attention, and I noticed that there were times where I could sit for the same period of time without the usual pain. And, that could happen when I was like reading a good book, having engaging in conversation with a friend, or watching, something that completely captured my attention. And these exceptions didn't happen every time, but they happened enough that I just couldn't ignore them. So how could sitting be dangerous if sometimes you are with pain, sometimes you're not, right? So that's when it hit me. It wasn't really sitting itself that caused pain. It was my expectations and fear of pain that activated my danger signals. So once I had that evidence, I started using it as a proof that sitting was actually safe. I began practicing what's called graded exposure. So gradually increasing my sitting time while reminding myself of those pain-free exceptions and kind of encouraging myself, knowing that I can do this rather than telling myself, because you know, I've done it before. So I started building that evidence list. So I want to share with you a story from my client that perfectly illustrates this concept. Sarah had been dealing with chronic back pain for close to 2 years, and she was like absolutely convinced that sitting made it worse. She had, all the trackers, the patterns, the evidence that the longer she sat, the more pain she was experiencing. Until one time when she was sitting at Sun's base basketball playoff game, and that game went into overtime. Um, she was, you know, she was sitting like literally for like I think close what I remember like 3 hours because there was overtime and all this prep and everything. So when she stood up at the end, that's when she realized that that game she was so, paying so much attention to it that she was okay. But at the same time, when she was working, she couldn't sit for longer than 30 minutes at her desk. So it occurred to her that it wasn't really the sitting that caused her problem. It was her belief that sitting was dangerous. So some of the common pain activities connections that I see with my clients is sitting with a back pain, bending over with a pain flare, walking often causes weakening, leg or back pain, lifting anything heavy, and with exercise, just overdoing it, right? Sometimes it's daily activities, the housework, the driving, the cooking, playing with kids. I have clients actually who um, playing with kids believed cause back pain, right? And very common also are work activities, so computer work, standing all day, commuting. So what we want to do is look for those exceptions because that's really, how we build that evidence list that our pain isn't purely physical, but it comes from those exceptions, from those times when these pain rules don't apply. So I'd like you to ask yourself, have you ever, done trigger activity without pain or with less pain than you expected? Are there times when you distracted or don't notice pain as much? Does your pain sometimes start before you even begin the activity? So this is like we anticipating the pain. Are there days when the same activity bothers you more or less? So some of the common things I've heard is I can sit with a movie theater, but not at my desk. And I can enjoy family event and sitting through the dinner, but not at home, right? Um, for some of my clients, my back doesn't hurt when I'm running and playing with my grandkids, even though I'm bending and lifting. So just like a detective, like a building a case, we want to gather evidence that our pain isn't purely structural. So the medical evidence could be doctors can find a clear physical cause, scan can show wear and tear. So that's very popular for like MRI findings that, lots of other people are just pain free because we know wear and tear happens with age and it's very common. Um, or even, multiple doctors have given you different explanations. We want to look for that pattern evidence. We want to look for when the pain varies dramatically day to day with same activities. We want to see where stress clearly affects your pain levels, where pain has started during like a particular maybe stressful time, or you have multiple symptoms that don't seem unrelated. And then the exception evidence are the times when we expected pain and didn't happen. So activities you can do when distracted, but not when focused on pain. And then the pain that changes based on your mood or circumstances. So I want to share like a sample of pain evidence list just so you get that clarity. So my client that I've mentioned, on her evidence list, she had MRI showed bulk disc bulges, but her pain-free sister had the same findings. Pain started during her divorce, not after an injury. She can sit through her daughter's dance recital, but struggle with 20 minutes of work. Pain is always worse on Monday mornings and better on vacation days. Or she enjoys vacations pain free and comes back after vacation first day in, she gets flare. She has hiked for hours um, and excited about the destination, pain free. And pain often starts in the car before even arrive at work. So that evidence list have helped her understand that her brain has learned to associate certain situations with danger, even when her body was perfectly capable. So once you start gathering that evidence, you can start begin gently challenging your brain's dangers association. So when pain starts during, for example, an activity, you can, you can just reflect. You can notice my brain is telling me that sitting is dangerous, but I know from my evidence that sitting itself is not causing this pain. My brain is just being protective. When we anticipate a trigger activity, you may reflect and say, my brain is worried about this activity because it's learned to associate it with pain, but I have evidence that this activity is actually safe. And doing a plane flares, just reminding yourself that right now it feels like this position is causing my pain. But I know from my exceptions and patterns that something else is happening here. So I'd like you to, as we move on through this lesson, start your own detective work. Keep a pain activity journal for a week. Not what you are doing when the pain starts or increases, but also note your mood, stress level, circumstances. Look for your exceptions. When has the usual pain activity connection have not, held true? I'd like you to create your evidence sheet. List all the reasons you pain, not be purely structural. Practice gentle challenging. So when pain flare arises, remind yourself of the evidence and stay curious, not judgmental. Approach this exploration just like a detective with the interest rather than forcing yourself to believe anything. And a few things that I'd like you to remember. Your brain created these activity pain connections because it loves you and wants you to keep you safe. It's not trying to, to trick you or make your life difficult. It's doing what brain is supposed to do, what it's doing its best, learning the patterns and trying to prevent future harm. But sometimes our protective brains can be little overenthusiastic in their safety measures. When you gently show your brain evidence that these activities are actually safe, you're not fighting against your brain, you're helping it update its outdated safety manual. You don't have to believe this completely right away. Just stay open to the possibility that your pain story might be more complex and hopeful than you originally thought. We want to really stay hopeful. I know it's so tricky. I remember those days too. Um, I want to remind you that challenging conditioned response doesn't mean ignoring your body or pushing through several pain. It means that we want to approach those activities with curiosity rather than fear, and want to be open to the possibility that our pain patterns may have more to do with our brain's protective response than the actual tissue damage.